cultivation registration process. And I am a sponsor along with Supervisor Williams, and Supervisor Williams is going to introduce the item.
So this board put a moratorium in place earlier this year, and it was in part because of the ambiguity in what the state will do with industrial hemp regulation. And given that the speed government moves, I think it's important that we minimize the length of the moratorium by getting a start on putting together local guidelines. And I want to be clear, I don't see this as Cannabis 2.0. I think this federal and state direction is a much simpler process. We have traditional ag farmers who would like the opportunity to grow hemp, and clearly we need to talk about how to protect both cannabis and hemp with cross-pollination issues. There's a number of concerns that come to mind. The goal here was to be transparent and kick off the process and have all stakeholders at the table as we discuss what that regulation should look like, rather than coming forward with a comprehensive plan that surprises everyone. But I think it is important this county is has a strong right to farm ordinance, and we shouldn't be holding up farmers any longer than we have to.
Thank you, sir, for your comments. And I have nothing further to state, so we will go forward. Supervisors, Supervisor McCowan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I appreciate Supervisor Williams' comments, and on February 19th, the board did direct staff to study this issue and bring forward recommendations. I appreciate the refinement to that direction, that there be I think it sounds like a robust stakeholder process where there's participation by the stakeholders in formulating those recommendations. I certainly support that. And of course, I see we have our Ag Commissioner here today rather than our Planning and Building Director. My only concern, we've put a lot of work on the Planning Department's plate, both director and staff, and including recently giving direction for cannabis enterprise zones, which requires a lot of work. So if we move forward and ask staff to devote more time to this as a priority item, I do think it could be appropriate to have this led by the Ag Department. Thank you.
Okay, well, when we talk about a lot on a department's plate, our Ag Department also has a lot on its plate.
Understood.
And adding new duties is perhaps something we're going to have to stop and reconsider. However, having said that, I see Supervisor Williams wants to speak, but I'd like to go to staff and hear from staff on this particular agenda item. Sir, would you like to speak?
Well, it's whatever the board's pleasure is.
Your name, please?
This is Jim Donnelly, the County Interim Ag Commissioner.
Thank you.
There are several ordinances out around the state that allow for growing of hemp as an industrial product. If you direct us, we'll be looking at the other ordinances and try to come up with something. Most of the ordinance are from planning departments. If you ask me to come up with something, we can work out of some of the other ordinances and let the planning department look at them and see what they think. The agenda item calls for feminized plants or feminized seed to be planted. Our department would go and inspect the seed when it comes in to verify that it comes from a recognized and approved source. Then they're going to have a registration. There'll be we'll ask for a registration fee for the planning department, for the county ag commissioner's office, and the state requires $900 for the county to pick up and turn into the state. Then when the 30 days before harvest, our department will go into the field and sample the field according to state procedures. And then if the plants that are tested are below 0.3% of THC, they'll be allowed to harvest it and package it however they choose to package. There's processing. There's people here in the county that would like to process hemp for CBD. As the state law and federal law, as I understand, have not approved the use of hemp CBD for human consumption at this point. There's a state law that's going through the processes at the current time. Maybe by next year that'll be approved. I don't know who was enforcing that. Apparently no one in the state is enforcing it. They're just talking about it. There's, I believe hemp's already being used for CBD oil all through the United States. There would be some concerns about the smell of the hemp because it is cannabis sativa and its proximity to neighborhoods or schools. And maybe these are things that planning should look at. There's seeds available that don't have the same smell as the skunk smell that people think of when they think of cannabis. So there's a lot of things we can look at, depending on what the board would like. Give us direction and then we'll move forward.
Okay. Planning and building staff, do you have comment?
As indicated, Jesse Davis, Senior Planner, Planning and Building. As indicated by our Agricultural Commissioner, there is a gamut of regulations that we can be looking at from across the state. Approximately 22 counties are currently accepting hemp registration forms of some type, and 35 counties currently have a moratorium across our state. Now, those that are in moratorium are in various stages of either developing ordinances or furthering their moratorium, and again, we can point to places such as Inyo County, which requires a conditional use permit, or Monterey County, which very much processes and has an ordinance structured in a similar manner to its cannabis regulations already existing. So again, as indicated by our Agricultural Commissioner, we have a gamut of options. Now, staff would look to you for your direction with regards to the prioritization of this issue in terms of how county staff should review this given our current tasks and current workload. Likely we would require some additional assistance in terms of vetting the various regulatory schemes that we'd be investigating and ultimately bringing forth for your review and approval. But that being said, we look for your direction in terms of how we should prioritize this issue.
And I think that we're going to go to supervisors in just a moment. But currently, with other counties, perhaps other states, there have been issues. Are you aware of those issues? And can you give us information?
Most definitely. Jesse Davis, Planning and Building Services. Cross-pollination is likely one of the largest issues that we've seen indicated in other jurisdictions as they review these policies. As indicated by the Commissioner, additional issues such as smell, traffic, things such as that still pose, a land use issue in terms of what impacts would be created by the planting of industrial hemp ultimately and sort of the associated land use issues. That being said, again, there's a gamut of regulatory schemes that we can review and investigate in terms of how we want to either discretionarily review these activities, such as Inyo County with a conditional use permit, or via a more ministerial process. That being said, again, there are issues to consider that, unlike our typical row and field crops, we should be thinking about, such as potential cross-pollination and other land use issues. So that being said, I think it does deserve additional regulatory review.
Supervisors, Haschak.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I appreciate the talk about priorities and some of these issues, and especially the enforcement of, these feminized seeds. But I guess I'm a little confused about where agriculture would be and where planning and building would be on this whole process. So how would you envision that? And I guess it's a question for both of you.
Jim Donnelly, County Ag Commissioner. I'd be looking at the laws and regulations that pertain to the agricultural commissioner and the other county ordinances to see what part the commissioner played. And that would be basically what I would be putting in the ordinance. If, there's a lot of other information that is planning that has to do with setbacks. Some counties require a 300-foot setback from another field, or a residential area. If there's a school, the planning department might want to consider how close they want the hemp plants to be close to the school. Because we're not talking about 10,000 square feet or 20,000 square feet. We could be talking to 60 or 70, 80 acres. There isn't a size limit other than it has to be larger than 1/10 of an acre. And the plants are supposed to be planted fairly close together. So we would basically be following that. And the Inyo hemp ordinance only has a few things that has to do with the commissioner, and it has to do with sampling, registration, types of seed they can use, and the other issues like setbacks or planning issues. Or
So
traffic.
for the agricultural department, you'd be checking on the feminized seeds and also the THC level, down the, 30 days before harvest.
Yes.
That would be your responsibility.
That and registering registering the grower with the county and the state. The state has a form, but they don't do registration. They just accept the registration from the county.
But they also designate the ag commissioner as the entity, local entity, to collect that registration fee. Isn't that correct?
That is correct. That's in law, the Food and Ag Code. So-
And with the testing, do we have labs here? Where would we have the testing done?
There's labs throughout California. We can decide or work with the grower on where we want to send the lab, as long as it's an approved laboratory. We can send a sample wherever there's an approved laboratory throughout the state. In the last week, I've received 2 advertisements from companies that do that. The other commissioners have proposed 2 other companies. There were some companies that were testing for residues on produce, and now they've moved on to testing for cannabis and THC and other things pertaining to that.
And one final question.
Yes, sir.
Do you see is there a clamoring for production of hemp in the county?
I get several calls a week for growers who would like to produce hemp in the county. And even some of the cannabis growers have asked if they could grow hemp. So, one guy talked to me this morning. He asked if he could grow it. He wanted to put it in the middle of his vineyard. So there is some question of whether or not the smell of the hemp could taint the wine grapes, but I haven't read any studies or found any studies that have anything to do with that. Other people have told me that they've grown the cannabis alongside their grapes and they didn't have any problems. But they could also find clones or seed that had lower scent, it didn't smell so much like the skunk smell of cannabis.
Supervisor Williams.
When I started talking to constituents about this, what hit me is it's legal federally, it's legal at a state level. It's only our county that has outlawed it. And we have a strong right to farm ordinance. And yet we're telling these very farmers what legal plants they can grow. So I don't think we should be deciding whether we want hemp or we don't want hemp. The issue is it the role for county government to tell a farmer on ag land what legal crop they may cultivate?
Supervisor Haschek?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I certainly think it is when you talk about the risk that it puts the cannabis production at. That if we're risking, the quality of our cannabis, then that's certainly an economic question that we need to deal with. So.
Supervisor Williams.
Supervisor Haschek, I appreciate the concern. I have the concern as well, and that's why I want to start early and make sure we put together the best framework as a model across the nation of how you can have two crops coexisting, cultivating essentially the same plant. But I don't think it's our role to represent just one sector of farming. We represent all farmers. We have farmers that are asking today to grow a legal crop, and we're telling them no, it's illegal in this county. That's not setting well with me. It's like saying, the smell of Brussels sprouts, or, we don't want apples because we want to favor pears. It's just not our role as government to dictate which legal crops are cultivated. I think it is our role to set some regulation to protect the crops on both sides of the property line. And that's what this effort is about. It's about kicking off the discussion to work with stakeholders to come up with policies that will enable both industries to survive in parallel.
Supervisor McCowan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, the county has not banned the cultivation of industrial hemp. The county has placed a moratorium to come up with appropriate regulations, which is what you seem to be calling for. So I don't think we have any conflict here.
As usual, we agree.
Of course.
Okay. I'm going to now go to the public. This is a time for the public to speak on this agenda item. I don't see any cards, but you're welcome to come forward. Please come forward. State your name for the record, sir.
Ron Edwards, Willits. Well, here I am again at the beginning of an ordinance process. I've done some research and work with people in Oklahoma. I had some outreach from some farmers in the southeast who were interested in hemp breeding in part of my library, and I had to turn them down because I can't legally do the breeding for hemp. There's also an incredible program going down south at Santa Rosa JC with Dr. George Salou, who is doing the research. They are actually doing studies with terpene drifts, and it's actually a program that is going to be starting in the spring where they will actually be able to take in students and train them in the proper cultivation of hemp as well as cannabis. In fact, they're looking at as low THC or high THC. And they're actually setting up sensors in vineyards to actually measure the terpene drift and if that is the effect on grapes. Also, they're finding that the results of going with feminized seeds is not the solution. Because across the country we're finding that you're getting the same results whether you do feminized seeds or regular seeds. You're still getting males because we're not at the point of stabilizing. There are some stabilized, but it is not just saying if you go with feminized. And a lot of areas are going with local nurseries that work with their ag department to certify it. And I think that this is where we got off track with cannabis, is that this is an agricultural product. And if we have the ag department working with this, we can really develop good sets of good farming practices. Working with local nurseries to provide female clones is a much more stable way of getting a feminized field. Also, Sonoma County is looking at, and the approach is that it's expensive land, and you can't afford to have it pollinated. So a lot of the hemp cultivators are worried about cannabis pollination because we have this 6-plant rule. So please look at the local area that we have. We have some really good expertise going down. We have a lot of people in this county who have expertise doing consultant out of the state. And I just hope that we're more open and looking at this in a much more practical way. Thank you.
Thank you. Linda Gray.
I'm Linda Gray. Thank you all. I'd just like to speak to the feminized seed issue. We used them in the past, and they indeed do not turn out to be 100% female, which isn't a big deal for cannabis. But, if there's 50 acres, that could be a problem. I'd say there were at least 20% were male plants. But I'm not opposed to hemp. I just feel like it would be very important for the county to perhaps rely on zoning and also map out where the existing cannabis farms are now so that wherever the hemp farms go in, that they are not impacting the cannabis farms, especially the ones that are keeping their heritage legacy strains alive. Thank you.
Thank you. Monique Ramirez?
Hello, Monique Ramirez, District 3, I'm representing the Covelo Cannabis Advocacy Group. We are also not opposed to hemp and all the amazing products that can come from it, but we do have concerns about how it is going to impact the cannabis cultivators that have basically been put forward first in terms of being able to cultivate. And so we want to protect them. And I think it's really important that there is data and research that is conducted to find out the level of how far cross-pollination can go. I'm excited to hear what Ron just mentioned about research being conducted to figure that out. I think that's going to be a really important component to this whole thing, as well as what other people have said about the feminized seed. It's not 100% guarantee. Plants are magical, and they can do magical things like turning hermaphrodite. It happens even with cannabis cultivation. And so that's a big concern, especially when there's like large tracts of hemp being produced. And one concern and question I have is about are farms looking to do it for CBD production, or are any farms looking to do it for fiber? Because you're going to need a lot of cannabis or hemp. It's basically the same thing in my opinion, to be able to do these processes. So that's something to be considered. And then that raises the question about our mitigated negative declaration. And I know because this is federally designated as an agricultural product, we don't really have to do those things, but I do wonder though if it would trigger that in any regard, meaning then we would need to do a full EIR, and then we're in this conundrum right now with our current MND possibly not holding up for the cannabis cultivators. So maybe there's an opportunity to bridge that gap if that comes down to it. So I just want to pose those questions because I personally don't know, and our cannabis community is very concerned about that. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Supervisor Williams, I'll stop public expression just for a moment.
I suspect we may have more public comment of that same theme. I'm wondering if the interim ag commissioner could comment. It's my
I
understanding.
was going to wait to the end and
Okay.
ask them.
I was just trying to ward it off.
Okay, thank you. Hannah?
Hannah Nelson, I'm back. On behalf of MCA, we did submit a memo addressing some of the issues and questions, and really, I applaud the effort to bring forth an issue and request robust stakeholder input from the beginning. And this is going to be a repeated drumbeat that I have regarding any issue. I'm trying to figure out ways to save time and energy during these sessions so that the pragmatic, on-the-ground concerns can be kind of talked about and worked out with staff in advance of bringing then the important policy decisions before you. So I would encourage that involvement, and I think that I don't know what the correct forum would be, whether it would be an advisory group, whether it would be a dreaded working group, whether it would be a standing committee. I don't know what the proper forum is. I can tell you that MCA is beginning to engage its constituents in this dialogue. We intend to be having some robust discussions and gathering a lot of input as well. I was really pleased to hear an update on some of the research from Ron, and I think that's really excellent information to plug into. And then finally, I just want to say welcome to the interim ag director. Bye-bye.
And thank you, Hannah. Talking about correspondence we received. We also received the policy statement from California Farm Bureau Federation, and also the Origins Council submitted 3 pages.
Yes, and I actually did, thank you for mentioning that, because I did want to say that MCA strongly supports the issues that were brought up by MAP, and I think that they're important and very well thought out. Thank you.
Right. Sarah?
Hi, Chair Brown and members of the board. I want to echo the gratitude for the supervisors bringing this forth and the staff and really the solutions culture that we're in around moving forward with cannabis and hemp and economic development overall. It's really refreshing and exciting. My name is Sarah Bodner, and I'm with Henry's Original. We're a vertically integrated craft cannabis brand based in Laytonville. And thank you to Supervisors Brown and Williams specifically for bringing forth the hemp discussion. As longtime cannabis cultivators who have built a top-selling brand for Mendocino's flower, we would like to express our support for hemp cultivation. We believe that hemp is an untapped agricultural resource for Mendocino County. And as THC farmers, we totally share the concerns of our peers to ensure that hemp cultivation not endanger our cannabis crops. We'd like to express a few considerations that must be taken into account in this discussion so that the hemp industry can coexist with the THC flower industry, which we really believe is possible. First, hemp production must be only for fiber or cannabinoid production, not for seed. The second, the source of hemp stock must be feminized seed or female clones. And third, any contamination source must be held liable for remediation or loss on neighboring farms. We see this as a tremendous economic revitalization opportunity for Mendocino to generate revenue for farmers, and we urge you to consider hemp as a right-to-farm crop, like any other crop that anyone can grow anywhere. We seriously caution against over-regulation and inflated fees in this exploration that could hamstring this as an economic development opportunity that we see could specifically help fill the opportunity gap that the state's over-regulation of cannabis has created. And as we look to the future of hemp farming as well as cannabis, we keep repeating this, that we're not just thinking about California, we're thinking about the nation and the world. And hemp production now, starting on this path now, will allow us to bring Mendocino's products to these future markets quickly and further the development and the recognition of the legacy we have here in Mendocino. And we hope that this be something that can benefit all farmers in this community. Thank you.
Casey O'Neill.
Good morning, Casey O'Neill, local farmer. The reason I got into advocacy almost 6 years ago was because there were two central tenets. I wanted to see cannabis normalized, both locally and at a national and world level, and I wanted to see small food producers have access to cannabis as a viable crop. I found that to be the model that works for my farm, and so that was really what spurred me into the conversation. I was very excited about cooperatives, and a lot of my hopes in the cannabis space have been dashed. It has been an exceptionally hard road, and there is a feeling for me of excitement around hemp. We follow a lot of small farms around the country on Instagram, and we see hemp being planted in a lot of places, and this really amazing thing rolling out, in which it's kind of what we had dreamed of for cannabis, in which the regulations are very similar to what they would be for food production. It's all regulated under Department of Ag. North Carolina offers loans and extension support services for hemp farmers. So I think there's a tremendous opportunity here, and what I would like to see is a feasibility study around a hemp producers cooperative. I think there's a tremendous opportunity for being able to create something that helps to bring in a lot of the farmers who are currently locked out. Especially, there's a lot of food farmers who could definitely do an acre of hemp. And a lot of what I see is a conversation around the industrial nature of hemp production that is likely to evolve. And I don't think that we can compete on an industrial scale without achieving an economy of scale via some sort of a cooperative. And so for me, there's kind of this feeling of a lot of the disparate strings of my work over the last few years having prepared me to engage in this type of process. And so it's something that feels very exciting. It's also something that I don't feel that I have all of the tools necessary to understand the various ramifications. And so I would very much like to commit to participating in a process, as Hannah mentioned, be it a working group, be it some sort of a committee, whatever the opportunity is, I think there's a huge potential. And one of the things I'm really curious about that I'd like to see us develop is the ability to register genetics. Mendocino County has been the home of a lot of the CBD development over the last 10, 15 years, 20 years even. Well, not 10, 15 years really, but I think there's a lot of potential for registering some of the genetics that have been created here locally and being able to propagate those, put them into the hands of medicine makers who are currently, who were producing CBD medicines under the 215 SB 420 regulations, who are now unable to do so. I think there could be some very real opportunities there. And I think perhaps a partnership with the California Center for Cooperative Development, the CCCD. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Public comment on this item?
Devin Jones, Mendocino County Farm Bureau, and apologize for the late comment letters coming in this morning. But this is an issue that is new to Farm Bureau per se, in terms of there's not a lot of examples of comparable ordinances out there. There's not a lot of examples of sort of viable traditional ag folks that have gone into working on hemp that I've been able to talk to. But just a couple of points, I guess, that I'll highlight from our letter is that, I agree with a lot of the speakers ahead of us that, we definitely don't want to see a complicated, convoluted process begin regarding hemp. I definitely think we would support something simplistic of a registration process versus a permit. San Joaquin County, their Board of Supervisors today is looking at an ordinance that's pretty darn restrictive. Tulsa's got an ordinance on the books that's fairly restrictive, but these are coming from counties that are not dealing with cannabis, and so there's not really a good model. I did have a pretty substantial conversation last week with Tony Linegar, the Ag Commissioner in Sonoma County, and I think they're on a similar pathway to what Mendocino County might be looking to do. They're coming up in April. That's when their moratorium is expiring, but they've already started the process. So thank you for bringing this forward today, because if we're looking to have something ready to go in February for next year's cultivation season, we don't have a lot of time to work on this. And kind of like Hannah said, I was a little bit leery when I wrote this, but because we need another committee, like another hole in the head per se. But in terms of the advisory committee model, Sonoma County has, that's what they were operating under this past couple of months. They've had farm bureaus, they've had cannabis cultivators, they've had members of the public. They've had those core group of people at the table to come up with what's being proposed and what's going to be moving forward. I definitely think in the last week, premised off what we're seeing now in grape harvest season and 0 to no contracts available for the wine grape industry, a lot of folks on the traditional ag side are really interested in diversifying. And this could be a commodity that would provide some additional resources for them. I don't know if it's going to be mostly CBD, I think, at this point in time for CBD oil production. I did talk to a couple of ag commissioners who said that, just like Ron was speaking to, just the list of folks that have been approved by CDFA for providing the registered seed is pretty minimal. So there are some interest in getting into the actual seed production, which is going to have the pollen management component to that. Fiber, I don't know if California is really going to be a fiber producer for a while, just simply because we don't have the processing infrastructure here at this point in time. And it's really going to depend on costs for shipping, as well as competition from fiber being brought in from foreign markets. So really, I think it's going to be CBD and to a degree seed production here in California. So I encourage you guys to start working on this process and let us know how we can help. Thank you.
And thank you for pointing out we do have more items that have been uploaded onto the website that can be downloaded now to your iPod or iPad. Okay, Supervisor Williams?
Yeah, I would, if we can call that speaker back up, I would like to hear whether the Farm Bureau is prepared to commit to working with the THC cannabis cultivators on brainstorming and working to get a regulatory framework in place. I think this is an opportunity where
For hemp?
traditional cannabis and Farm Bureau and hemp cultivators can all work together.
Well, yeah, that's what I was basically saying. That was the model in Sonoma, and I think that's the only way to do it. I mean, I think we have to have, some of these folks here that are way more expert in those areas, and I would be at the table to listen to these conversations because, Ron's got some expertise that I think would be very valuable. Other folks here in the room on the comments that were submitted today definitely have, that expertise that could bring that value to the table as we discuss, what's going to be moving forward with hemp. So, working group, what other form of committee might be put in place by this board. I just want to see it starting sooner than later, premised on our past experience with the cannabis subcommittee. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Please state your name for the record, sir.
Hello, thank you. My name is Brian White, and I'm probably a traditional wine grape grower for 38 years in Mendocino County. And recently our industry has been challenged with a lot of oversupply, probably sitting on 60% of my crop that I can't sell this year. So the reason I'm here is I want to diversify. And I know I don't want to be redundant. You guys have already brought up all the issues, but some of the issues that I'm hearing are about the male plants, and I think it would be a prudent farming practice for anybody to go out and monitor that. I don't know exactly how to do it, but I know we can handle that process. So again, traditional farmer, water rights, place of use maps, all those things. And I see an opportunity for myself and for the county. And it is legal, and I appreciate you guys listening to this, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Brian. Anyone else? Public expression? Seeing no one come forward. Board members, it's back before the board, but I would like to ask staff if they have any comment after hearing the speakers.
Jesse Davis, Senior Planner, Planning and Building Services. We definitely hear the public speaking here with regards to sort of their desires to see a simplistic but ultimately protective regulatory platform. And ultimately, I think that it's important that we recognize the initial constraints that our county in particular faces when comparing ourselves to not only counties across the state, but counties across the country as well. We are in a different position ultimately, given sort of our existing THC flower industry, as well as the development of and nurturing of a industrial hemp ordinance industry as well. That being said, I think that from the planning and building perspective, the three things that we would look at from the land use side of things are, what zoning districts ultimately we're wanting to place industrial hemp, what setbacks ultimately we want to apply from both a residential perspective but also a commercial perspective in terms of existing cultivators, and then ultimately the parcel sizes that we want to associate with regards to where industrial hemp should be grown and what size those parcels should be when submitted. Just some things to think about as we move forward as you start your discussion.
Supervisor Williams?
Yeah, question for staff, probably the Ag Commissioner. It's my understanding that hemp is a row crop and would not be subject to an EIR. Is that accurate?
Jim Donnelly, Interim Ag Commissioner. So far as I'm aware, nobody's approached any of the hemp growers in the state on an EIR. They're growing several parts of the state, and it is a row crop. It's a traditional crop. It's not an ag product. They're not going to be growing it on the top of mountains. When you're growing it in regular fields, some places they require it's grown indoors, or the growers choose to grow it indoors. But I haven't heard anything about an EIR, and I doubt if it'll be considered in the future, unless there's some major land changing events that take place by a grower.
Thank you.
Board members?
I would move the recommended action.
Second for discussion.
Okay, we have the recommended motion made by Supervisor Williams. We have a second by Supervisor McCowan. He's seconded for discussion. Supervisor McCowan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I do think we should move forward with the intent to get a hemp regulation for the county in place. I do think it's an economic opportunity that we should attempt to facilitate for local cultivators who want to engage in that. One issue, it looks like we have an Assembly Bill 228 in the state that currently, I guess the state doesn't recognize CBD hemp. So that bill may or may not pass this year, but if it did, that would probably greatly enhance the economic potential of hemp. But again, I think our intent should be able to get appropriate regulations in place so that we do have this opportunity, and ideally the state will change its policies, which currently appear to be overly restrictive. My concern with the motion as stated, it seems to put a bit of limitation on it in that it says limited to feminized seeds and female plants. And I think what I've heard today is there may be a number of issues, a number of alternatives, and I think it'd be more appropriate to form a working group to involving the broad range of stakeholders and simply direct them to investigate and make recommendations, assisted by staff.
Supervisor
Would you like me
Williams?
to amend the motion?
I think
I would like
that would be
further
appropriate
comment before we
first.
consider amending. Supervisor Haschek?
Yes, I think we need to move forward with this. I want to make sure that we're not shortchanging the whole cannabis process that we have, because we only have limited resources, we have limited person power, and I just think that when we have 900 permits out there, or applicants that haven't been permitted, we really need to focus on that too. I don't want to see us too distracted. And I'd like to see a timeline on this.
Okay. When they talked about economic development and the amount of hemp that could be grown, I have been contacted by a company that actually uses the oil for cosmetics, and most of their oil is imported into their business, into California, I guess you would say. So anyway, you know, I know there's some opportunities out there that individuals are looking for, and we've certainly heard from a traditional farmer that would like to expand into this area, and I believe there are others that have expressed an interest as well. And I do think a standing committee is a way we need to go. Or a working group, whatever you want to call it. But I do think we need to at least reconsider the fact of burden on staff, limited staff, how much work they have on their plates. And what I would like to see is coming back we have a meeting next week, we have a pretty full agenda for that particular meeting, but perhaps the first meeting in October, I would like to see a plan come back. I'm not sure who we should direct to devise the plan, but surely it should be something that will be up for discussion. It could be a standing committee, one of our own standing committees that comes up with the plan. I'm just not sure how to move forward on it, so we do have a motion, and I think there's going to be amendments to that motion. I'll go to Supervisor McCowan and then back to Supervisor Williams.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And before we get to an amended motion, you mentioned the economic development aspect, and of course, this certainly is. We do have a economic development cannabis-related committee already. One thought might be that we ask Supervisor Williams and Jurdy to kind of lead the stakeholder process with support primarily from ag staff. That's one option that might be viable to both get this process going and also minimize the burden on staff. And I am very concerned about that, given the number of tasks that we have already assigned. So just a couple of thoughts.
Well, I think those are good thoughts. Supervisor Williams?
I would agree with that, and if Supervisor Jurdy is willing, I think I too would like to spin off one less ad hoc. I think we have enough going as it is.
Absolutely.
And likely we will have a lot of the same people showing up. So why not do it in one setting?
Okay,
May I
and does
amend
this
the-
ad hoc comply with Brown Act?
We have an upcoming meeting that will be publicly noticed on October, I think it's October 5th. But we would probably want to have at least one meeting prior to that meeting, just to sort of organize thoughts.
So for the two members of the ad hoc? Okay.
Well, we were talking about noticing that event, given that it'll be at Ukiah Valley Conference Center. It's in collaboration with MCA. A lot of people will be there. It'd be great for more supervisors to come. And so maybe we should go through the process of proper notice so that it's not limited to just the ad hoc.
Okay, I'd like to go to Supervisor Haschek.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I see that we have a meeting in October, two meetings, one on the 1st and one on the 22nd. So I would like to go with your idea of having a report back in October, and obviously the 22nd would be the reasonable one after that meeting. And I appreciate the opportunity to attend that meeting and all the other supervisors, the possibility. So I'd like to see that publicly recognized.
Okay, and we might want to also do some news releases on it because this is somewhat a change of event for that particular forum. Supervisor Williams?
Yeah, I'd like to amend that motion to provide direction to staff to work with the Cannabis Economic Development Ad hoc to develop an industrial hemp cultivation process and to work with cannabis and farming stakeholders to adequately protect existing cannabis cultivation.
Okay, there has been amendment. Clerk, did you get that?
I did. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Supervisor McCowan, you were the second. Are you going to agree to the amendments?
Yes.
Okay. Any other comment? Supervisor Haschek, did you want to speak again? No, I'm fine. Okay. So everyone understands the motion? Supervisor Williams?
I didn't include in the motion, but I think there is an implicit agreement here that the ad hoc will report back at the later October meeting with the status.
Okay. And I think that's understood. It doesn't need to be in the minutes, and we will record that so it gets into agenda forecasting. Okay. We're going to vote by the button.
Motion carries unanimously.